Hello, my name's Ben Wilson. I'm one of the ACCA's expert tutors for the AFM paper and also for AAA as well. You might have seen me there on the advanced auditing paper. So in this session, we're going to be looking at risk management. We're going to do a basics overview of risk management to make sure you've got the fundamental principles nailed down. Then we're going to go over some of the common issues that students face in risk management questions, and I'm going to give you some advice on how to overcome them. Then I'm going to do a demonstration of good practice using a written risk management question. So the basics, and this is something that students do tend to struggle with. It's a really technical topic, risk management. If you feel like you're learning a foreign language and none of the words and terminology make any sense, well, that's normal. Everybody feels like that. But I find it's really important in this technical topic area that you have the fundamentals right. Because if you understand the basics, then when it comes to all of the complicated language, you've always got something to come back to. So, I'm an Arsenal fan, and Arsenal are going to be playing Man City soon, and I obviously want Arsenal to win because I'm a fan of that club. And if Arsenal do win, well, to me, that's upside risk. Okay, that's a good thing. I'm happy if Arsenal win. This picture you can see there is me at the 2014 Cup final where Arsenal won 3-2 against Hull. And although my smile is a little bit wry there, I was very, very happy. But if Arsenal lose against Man City, that's going to be the look on my face, right? That is my downside risk. And I am exposed at the minute to both upside and downside risk for the Arsenal v Man City match. If Arsenal win, upside. If they lose, downside. So how can I remove the downside risk? Okay, and if you get this, well, you've understood the fundamental principle of risk management and hedging. So what could I do to remove my exposure to Arsenal losing so that I'm happy if Arsenal lose? Have you thought of a way I could do it? Well, one way is I could place a bet on Man City to win, Arsenal to lose. And so if Arsenal win, well, I'm happy because they're my team. But if Arsenal lose, well, I'm not as unhappy because I've got the winnings from my bet to offset my unhappiness. So I have managed to reduce my downside risk. Now, I don't bet. Right, it's not something that I do. It's not culturally part of me, but I know that some people do. You may not. But that is one way that I could remove that downside risk or reduce that downside risk. And that's all that the hedging products are all about. When you go through your notes on things like interest rate futures and options, all they are is fancy ways of placing a bet on the thing that you don't want to happen. So that if that thing does happen, like interest rates rise and you don't want them to rise because you're a borrower and you would pay more interest on your loans, well, you win on your bet using the interest rate future. Okay, so if you've got that fundamental principle right and nailed down, you've understood the very basics of hedging, and now you can build on those foundations. Let's take that basic principle though and start applying it to the kind of situations you'll see in the AFM exam, because it's not going to be that the tutor is bothered about a football team winning or losing. It's going to be some sort of financial risk. So the kind of risks that we tend to see in AFM, well, the first one you might see is foreign exchange risk. And this is where a company is exposed to foreign exchange risk because they're going to be buying or selling foreign currency in the future. They might be buying some machinery overseas in 3 months' time, and therefore they have to buy foreign currency to pay for the machinery. Or they might be receiving some foreign currency from some sales in 6 months' time, and they're exposed to foreign exchange risk because in 6 months' time, they're going to be converting or selling that foreign currency into their home currency. Now, in those situations, we're exposed to interest rates rising or falling. If we're a buyer, we're exposed to our downside risk of the foreign currency becoming more expensive, and therefore it rising in price. or if we're going to be selling foreign currency in the future, we're going to be exposed to exchange rates falling where that foreign currency becomes worth less money. The other type of risk we'll see is around interest rate risk. And this one's slightly easier to get your head around. We'll either be a borrower or a saver in the future. A borrower, well, that means that in 3 months' time, we're going to be taking out a loan to perhaps fund the growth of the business. Or in 6 months' time, we might be receiving some money that we're going to place on deposit with the bank, making us a saver. And if we're going to be borrowing or saving money in the future, well, we're exposed to interest rates rising or falling. If we're a borrower, we're worried about rates going up because we'll pay more interest on our loan when we take it out. If we're a saver, we're worried about interest rates falling because we'd receive less money on our deposits when we put them in the bank. So, the rule. And this is something that many students get wrong. In fact, in the March-June 23 exam, when there was a big risk management question, and actually in December as well, of the previous year, lots of students had a problem with this. It was something that the examiner really highlighted, that students got the hedging the wrong way round. They were worried about Arsenal losing, but they placed a bet on Arsenal to win instead. They got it the wrong way round, and therefore they didn't hedge. So this rule will help you to get it the right way round. Do we buy or sell? So if we're a borrower in an interest rate scenario or a buyer of foreign currency, we need to buy our hedging product. And if the hedging product is an option, that is calls. So borrowers and buyers buy. Okay? And that is calls if it is an option, the option to buy. B and C being near each other in the alphabet. So let's explain why that is, because it's always good to understand the rule. If we're a borrower, we're exposed to interest rates rising and we pay out more interest on our loan. If we're a buyer of foreign currency, we're exposed to that foreign currency going up in price. So both a borrower and a buyer are exposed to prices rising. That's their downside risk. And so placing our bet on a hedging product, we buy the hedging product now and then sell it later. And that will make us a gain if the hedging product rises in price. Okay, so we've placed a bet on the thing happening that we don't want to happen. We don't want prices to rise, so we place a bet on prices rising to offset our downside risk. So that would, if we have on our bet, if interest rates do rise or currency prices do go up, we make a gain or our bet wins, and that offsets the extra interest cost. That's the underlying transaction, the interest rate borrowings, or the extra cost that we've had to incur to buy the currency. The hedging product will make us a gain to offset that loss. And, well, with savers and sellers, it's the other way round. Savers and sellers sell. And if it is options, that's puts. Because a put is the option to sell. So look at that, SSS, savers and sellers sell, and S and P are near each other in the alphabet, or salt and pepper, if you prefer to remember it like that. So why is that? Let's just briefly explain it. Well, the exposure is the other way round. So savers are exposed to rates falling. Sellers of currency are exposed to rates to prices falling. And selling that hedging product makes us a gain if there is that fall in price. So it's just the opposite way round. And just the same as with borrowers and buyers buying, this will offset the loss on the underlying transaction. This is our way of putting our bet on the right way round. So here's that in summary. Borrowers and buyers buy, and that's call options. Savers and sellers sell, and that's put options. And that works for everything, every hedging product, except for one. And there is one that doesn't fit the rule. One that is the wrong way round. And that one is interest rate futures. There are loads of hedging products in the notes. All of them follow this rule except for things related to interest rate futures. So that's IRFs and options on IRFs. These are the other way round. And the reason for that is that interest rate futures are priced at 100 minus interest rates. So an interest rate future is priced at something like 95 if interest rates are 5%. And if rates go up or down, well, the interest rate future changes in price, but it changes the opposite way round. It goes down in price when interest rates go up. Interest rate future at 10% would be 90. An interest rate future at 5% would be 95. So it's the wrong way round. They move down when interest rates go up. And therefore you have to put your bet on the other way round. But that rule works for everything else. So that's I'm trying to give you a couple of fundamentals there. We're now going to have a look. So that's our basic points covered. We're now going to have a look at some of the resources that are on the Study Hub that are going to help you around risk management. Now, the first thing I wanted to show you, I'm in the Study Hub here, is the study text. You click on chapters here on the left-hand side, and it brings up the textbook. And there is quite a lot on hedging products, on risk management. Chapter 13 is all of the content on options. Chapter 14 is the content on Forex, foreign exchange risk management, and Chapter 15 is the content on interest rate risk management. Now, there is lots of detailed technical content in here, and you can be examined on any of it. So it's really important that you are familiar with all of the content of these chapters. So I recommend that you spend some time either going through your notes from your training provider or using these lovely notes that ACCA have provided for us. Something else that's really helpful with our on the Study Hub for risk management are these flashcards. When I go into the flashcards, they're organised by chapter. So I can pick one of the chapters that I like the look of, something that I want to test myself on. Let's go interest rate risk management. I click update, and this gives me little flashcards that test me on the different hedging products. This is really useful to make sure that you've really understood what these various products are. Do you know what an FRA is? Well, an FRA, have a read of that. Quite technical. An FRA is a way of placing a bet on interest rates moving. Okay, and it can make us a gain or a loss to offset our exposure to interest rates. It's a forward rate agreement. Next one, an interest rate cap. Do you know what that is? Well, interest rate caps will give us a maximum interest rate that we would have to pay on our loan. Again, a way of putting a bet on that limits our exposure to interest rates. An interest rate floor, well, that one's the other way round. This is going to give us an absolute minimum that a saver is going to receive on a deposit. Another way of putting on a bet. Or an interest rate collar, that one, well, that is a combination of a floor and a cap. Okay, you take up both a floor and a cap, and what that does is it gives you a range within which you will pay your interest rates at a minimum of 4% and a maximum of 6%, if you like. And your interest rate cost will be somewhere within that range. Again, it's a way of putting on a bet. Now, there are loads of these flashcards across both chapters, all of chapters 13, 14 and 15, and they're a really useful way of you testing that you've got the knowledge that you need for AFM in risk management. Time now to go through some common issues that students have in risk management questions in the AFM exam. So a risk management question in this exam is, look at that page, doesn't it make your head spin? Risk management questions are a combination of complicated calculations. Okay? They're not quite as complicated as this page makes it look, but they are pretty complicated. And narrative as well, wordy questions. Okay, you'll get a mixture of do some calculations and then explain your numbers and perhaps give some advice to the company. Very often, the director of the company has a strange and incorrect view on risk management, and you have to explain why his opinion or her opinion is incorrect. And a lot of students are fine with the numbers. but struggle with the words. Some students find the calculations really challenging, but are okay on the narrative bits. If you want to really succeed in an AFM question on risk management, you've got to be decent at both. Okay, don't just practice the calculations and neglect the words, or don't just skip the calculations and focus on the words. You've got to be able to do both. Now, a lot of students have problems with the written questions because they focus on rote learning. Okay, now you do need to know some of the technical content, right? You need to know definitions of what a interest rate cap and an interest rate floor and collar and all of those other technical things like an FRA and an IRF. You do need to know what they are, which means you do need to do a bit of memorizing. But that's not enough. Okay, because in one of these questions on risk management, they will test that you understand these products, not just that you've memorized the definitions. So demonstrating your knowledge of these products does score you some marks, but not very many. It is not enough to pass the written bits of the questions. Each scenario will test that you really understand what these hedging products are by asking you searching questions on them, with giving you different scenario information. A director might have a strange opinion and you have to explain why they're incorrect. And so rote learning is not enough for this. You have to practice some questions. Next, the calculations. A lot of students miss out on calculation marks. And these are relatively straightforward marks to earn. Now, I say relatively straightforward, emphasis on the relatively, because these calculations are hard. But because they are tough technical calculations, a lot of students get lost. They look at them, they really struggle, and they decide to just skip out the calculations entirely. And the examiner always comments on that. When risk management calculations are tested, a lot of students don't do anything on the calculations at all. And those students will be missing out on lots of marks by skipping out the numbers. So I'm going to give you some tips. The other issue that students have when these calculations are tough is that they spend forever on them. Okay, and that's something the examiner often comments on. That in a risk management question, it tends to start with the calculations and then go on to a written element. Some students spend all of their time messing about in the numbers, not really getting anywhere, not earning very many marks, and then they never reach the easier narrative marks that come later. So I'm going to give you some tips on how to overcome those two issues, one around the wordy questions and one around the numbers. So with the wordy questions, it's really important that you use the scenario fully. Okay, I'm using the word mine because I want you to see yourself as digging out lots of juicy facts that are going to be helpful for your answer from the scenario. And in fact, what I'd like you to do in your written questions, in your written answers, is every point you make should start with facts from the scenario. Okay, it shouldn't be things that you've memorized and that you're just writing. It should all be driven by the scenario. And once you've got a fact from the scenario, it's a really helpful way of earning more marks by adding depth to it, explaining why it's relevant. That's the structure and the approach in a written question. And ideally, your points would use more than one fact from the scenario. So you're building linkages between the different points in the scenario. And the AFM examiner always does this. Okay, they always give you lots of facts that you can join together to form a more complete picture. And I want you to see that as your job in a written risk management question. My tip for the calculations is that although these are hard, right, they are tough technical calculations, they all are repetitive. Okay, doing a calculation using an interest rate swap is overwhelmingly difficult when you first do it. But every time you do one of those swaps calculations, they always follow the same approach. It's a pro forma calculation, a standard calculation. And if you learn a standard pro forma formalized approach to each type of calculation, then that helps me, well, it helps a lot of students to make these tough calculations a little bit more manageable and a bit more straightforward. If it's an FRA, I'm just going to follow my process for an FRA. If it's an IRF, interest rate future, then I have a process that I'm going to follow for that interest rate future calculation. And by following that process, putting the numbers into the same positions each time in my calculation, setting it out in the same way, well, then it takes that tough calculation and makes it much more manageable. So my advice to you is, once you've got a standard approach for each type of question, and there are lots of these approaches in the notes, and I'm sure your training provider, if you're working with one, will give you a standard approach for each type of question. Make sure you use that same approach for every question you practice. Okay? And the more questions you practice using that approach, the more natural and normal it will feel, the more comfortable you will be. We're going to have a little bit of a demonstration now, showing you some good techniques around a written risk management question, because a lot of students struggle in these written elements. So we've got a scenario showing on screen here. Just going to give you a second to have a read of it. So perhaps you want to pause the recording here so that you can read the scenario. So I'm just going to read through it with you, just to make sure you've got the relevant points. So this company is called Arsenal Shirts Co. You can tell that I wrote this, can't you? They're based in the UK and they manufacture and sell football shirts. They used to make most of their shirt sales to the UK market. So it used to be a UK company selling to the UK. But now they're selling to retailers in Asia and those sales are growing. And they invoice for the Asian sales in A dollars, which is a foreign currency. Tells us that these Asian retailers, overseas retailers, are typically given 60 days of credit. That's quite a long credit period, isn't it? Now, Arsenal's taken out a fixed rate loan to fund growth of the company. And it tells us interest rates are forecast to rise over the remaining period of the loan. Okay, interesting. Then, Arsenal doesn't currently hedge its exposure to financial risks. The board has suggested that Arsenal should start to do so using derivatives. However, the FD has resisted this suggestion. She considers the costs of hedging to be greater than the benefits. Okay, now the requirement we're asked here is to discuss if it will be beneficial for the Arsenal company to manage its financial risks. Now, if it's a discussion question, first thing I'm thinking is I want a range of positive and negative points. Otherwise, it's not a discussion. And if I've got a range of positive and negative points, then what will I need at the end? Yes, to bring it all together. What will I need? Yeah, a conclusion. So what I'm going to need here, because it's 5 marks, I'm going to need 4 points. Right, a couple of positives, a couple of negatives, and I'm going to need a conclusion for that 5th mark. So I'm looking at 1 mark per well-explained point. That's my general rule of thumb. So, can we see any reasons why I would want to hedge here? Am I exposed to any risks? Well, around the sales of shirts in Asian dollars. That looks like a relevant fact to me. That's to do with, that exposes me to foreign exchange risk, doesn't it? Particularly given that these overseas retailers are given 60 days of credit. So I make a sale that I invoice in Asian dollars. And then 60 days later, I receive the Asian dollars and convert them into pounds. So I'm exposed to interest rate risk there, because over that 60 days, those Asian dollars might become worth less money in my pound terms, and therefore I'd receive less money in pounds for those sales receipts. So let's get that point planned out. I am exposed to foreign exchange risk. Because I'm invoicing in Asian dollars and I give 60 days of credit, the amount I receive in 60 days' time in pound terms could reduce. And that would happen if the Asian dollar weakens. So that's a reason that I would want to hedge, because I'm exposed to that foreign exchange risk. What about on this loan? Am I exposed to interest rate risk here? Well, hopefully you spotted the significant point here. This one word changes everything. It's a fixed rate loan. So if interest rates go up or down, my interest costs are not going to change, even if interest rates do rise over the period of the loan. I'm not bothered because I've removed both upside and downside interest rate risk by taking out a fixed rate loan. So that's a reason not to hedge. I'm not exposed to interest rate risk because it's a fixed rate loan. Interest rate costs will remain constant even if rates do rise as is forecast. Notice how I've used two facts here from the scenario in each of my points, building linkages between them. Okay, that helps me to earn more marks. Right, is there anything else that tells me about whether I would or wouldn't want to hedge? I know down here, the finance director considers the costs to be greater than the benefits. Is there anything about what these costs are? Well, it tells me here that we don't currently hedge our exposure to financial risks. So because I don't currently do it, I'm not an expert. Management don't know what they're doing. They might get it wrong. They might spend lots of time trying to understand how to do the hedging. And that might distract them from the running of the business. Oh, that's a nice point. Let's get that one in. So we're not experienced in hedging. And because it is quite complicated, it's going to take us some time to work out how to do it. Management might therefore be distracted from the running of the business. And, well, this next point I'm going to come up with is going to come from my own knowledge. But also from, lots of question practice as well, that whenever I use one of these hedging products, I'm entering into a transaction with a bank. Now, the banks do not give me these hedging products out of the goodness of their hearts. Okay, they do it. Well, you tell me, why do they? Why does a bank or a trader sell me an interest rate future or a forward rate agreement? Why do they do it? Of course, they do it to make money, right? They make money out of me every time on transaction costs. So I can get that point in. Okay? Transaction costs could be significant. There will be fees involved in entering into some of these hedging products that I might take out. Lovely. So I've got 4 points here. One of them is a positive and 3 of them are negative. So it is a discussion about whether I should hedge. So what do you think in conclusion? Should we hedge? Well, actually, we're told quite a relevant fact up here. Sales to retailers in Asia are growing. And so my exposure to my foreign exchange risk is going to get bigger. Therefore, that pushes me towards saying it is worth me hedging for my foreign exchange risk. So my conclusion is I am going to hedge my exposure to the Asian dollar weakening. Now, I have got off the fence and said which way around I think it is. And that is a rather than strengthening or weakening rather than changing. Okay, and the reason I'm doing that is to show my understanding. I am exposed to the Asian dollar weakening because I'm going to receive a fixed amount of Asian dollars in 60 days' time. And if those Asian dollars are weaker, they're worth less in pound terms. And therefore, I'll receive less pounds. So that, and I'm using my fact about my sales increasing in Asian dollars to make the point that my exposure to this risk is growing and could be significant. And therefore that makes it more worthwhile to hedge. Right, that's my answer planned out. Now what I'm going to do is show you how I would take that planned answer and turn it into a full written answer. I really like this approach of getting my ideas down in a plan and then writing it up because I can consider the point again and write it up really briefly and succinctly. So all I'm doing in the exam software is taking my plan and then expanding out my points. I'm not retyping the whole thing because that would be really time inefficient. So this first point here, I'm going to write it up as briefly as possible. This is that I am exposed to foreign exchange risk. Because I invoice in Asian dollars, I give 60 days of credit, and therefore over those 60 days, the Asian dollar could weaken and the amount that I receive in pound terms would fall. So let's get that point written out. Arsenal is exposed to foreign exchange risk as the invoicing is in Asian dollars and customers are given 60 days of credit. The Asian dollar could weaken over the 60-day period between invoicing and collecting the debt, and that would reduce the amount received in pound terms. Okay, what I'm doing there by being confident around weakening and strengthening is showing that I really understand what is going on with this foreign exchange risk. I'm not just saying I'm exposed to the risk. In my explanation, I'm showing that I understand what the risk is. A really valuable thing to do to help you to earn marks. My second point was that I wasn't exposed to interest rate risk because this loan is a fixed rate. So regardless of rates going up or down, or it actually says rates are going to rise, my interest rates are going to remain constant. So there is no exposure to interest rate risk. No exposure to interest rate risk exists as a fixed rate loan has been taken out. The interest costs on the loan will remain constant, even if interest rates do rise as forecast. There is no benefit to using a hedging product here as no interest rate exists. So that extra point there is saying, don't bother hedging your interest rate risk. My next point was about, I don't know what I'm doing with hedging and it's complicated, so management could be distracted from running the business. So we're not experienced in hedging. The board are considering using derivatives for the first time. Notice how I'm quoting a fact from the scenario there. The transactions can be complex. Management may spend time understanding the hedging products, distracting them from running the business. Then my next point is about transaction costs. So those could be significant. For example, bank transaction fees. I'm keeping that point simple because it is a very simple point. And then in conclusion, I am saying I should hedge because my exposure is growing with these increasing sales. I should hedge my foreign exchange risk. I should hedge my exposure to the Asian dollar weakening on any individually significant Asian dollar sales. The increasing A dollar sales mean that the benefit of foreign exchange risk reduction would outweigh the costs. I'm bringing that back. Notice that conclusion is bringing it back using the same language as the director used because they thought the costs would outweigh the benefits. How did you know? If you're a marker, by the way, how would you know that my final point is a conclusion? Haha, of course, because it's got a heading, conclusion. You can't possibly miss the fact that it's a conclusion. Isn't that a really good tip to finish on? Excellent. Well, I hope that you have found this session useful and you've got those basics nailed down now for risk management, and you've got some really helpful tips there for approaching written risk management questions. Best of luck with your AFM studies.